Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? I mean, you've seen the substance and everything it has to offer, so what could go wrong if you follow the instructions? Today we're gonna break down The Substance, one of the best films of the year, one of the best horror movies of the year. I'm ready to explain the film, talk about some messaging and some meanings, talk about my theories. I have a lot. There's so many details in this film and you might have missed a couple. Let's dive in. Everything will be time coded, so if you want to jump around, please feel free. I'm going to start off by explaining the film as a whole. Please keep in mind the film is not out on VOD or digital at the moment, so unfortunately I don't have a lot of examples to show you, but I'll do my best. Let's begin. The Substance starts on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, showing Hollywood legend Elizabeth Sparkle's star being put down. From here, it passes through time. We see the seasons change and it starts to crack. And then we're in present day, which is Elizabeth Sparkle's 50th birthday, where she is fired from her job as an aerobics TV star. And she gets into a car accident when leaving her job and seeing her billboard being torn down. At the hospital, a nurse secretly gives her a thumb drive, which has information for The Substance, which is a black market drug, promising to make a younger and more perfect version of the person who uses it. Although the two will always remain connected. And Elizabeth orders one, and then out of her back grows Sue. Sue is played by Margaret Qualley and is immediately hired as Elizabeth's replacement on the TV show. She has an instant rise to fame, but the two bodies still have to switch every 7 days as per the instructions on The Substance. Every day on Sue's time period when she is in charge, when she's activated, she has to stabilize herself using liquid that is extracted from Elizabeth's body, from her back. But Sue begins to push the deadline. One night, she extends her time in the body, and this results in Elizabeth aging rapidly in her finger. This is a warning sign of things to come, but it does not slow Sue down because she gets the opportunity to host the New Year's Eve event, a huge event on the network. And in doing so, she justifies using extra time in the body in activation mode, stealing it from Elizabeth and extracting liquid from her back to extend her time. She tells herself this is because of photo opportunities and press events, but when the liquid finally runs out, she must switch back. Elizabeth then wakes up in her body, seeing the consequences of Sue stealing all of her time. She has rapidly aged and she orders a termination. But when she's injecting Sue with this termination, she realizes that she needs Sue and she believes she needs Sue, and Sue's the only part of her that people love. She stops and revives Sue, but then Sue wakes up, sees the termination, and attacks Elizabeth. Sue kills Elizabeth and then goes to the New Year's Eve show to prep, but when she gets there, her body starts to fall apart because she cannot exist without Elizabeth. Desperate, Sue returns to her home and reuses the activation pouch which first created her from Elizabeth's back. She is hoping to create another new form of herself, a better form, but this activation pouch is meant to be used once. And in turn, she births a monstrous concoction, a hybrid of both Elizabeth and Sue, and so much more. This monster dresses up and goes to the New Year's Eve show, but the audience is horrified by the creature and chaos erupts. She is in a way decapitated by part of the audience, but a new head grows and it's a lot. She's bleeding everywhere. But she manages to run away and stumble onto the sidewalk where she falls over and basically explodes. From here, part of her body, which is Elizabeth's old head, is the only part intact, and it crawls along the sidewalk back to the Hollywood star where we started the film off. Here, she melts away and dies overnight, becoming one with the star. The next day, her remains are cleaned away. Let's talk about the tone of the film. The tone of the film is perhaps what drew me in the most. It goes from intense and relatable moments to pure body shock gore, the most goriest of gore. It's also wacky and over the top. It plays between these deeper layers the real substance, and we will get into it, the name, the substance of the story, and of course, the surface level of Hollywood. It really pulls us through the trenches, and the second time I saw this film in the cinema, I was sitting near an older lady, and I was so curious to see how she would react. And during the first part of the film, the initial gore scenes, especially, injecting the substance and then the back birthing scene, this woman was horrified. But by the end, when the monster is curling her own single strand of hair, she was laughing, she was giggling along. When she vomited out a boob, that's basically what happened on stage, she was also laughing. And I just think it's such an interesting balance. It's a film that feels intimate and personal, showing us what happens primarily behind closed doors for these women. But then it's able to explore these fears in an exaggerated manner to heighten the ridiculousness, especially in the face of evil. And I think that's truly what makes this film so special. Let's start with the basic stuff. Coralie Farja, the director of the film, told Rue Morgue that the film was inspired by her own experience as a woman in her 40s, approaching her 50s. It's about the way society is structured in a way that's very problematic regarding those issues. Although the film is over the top in its delivery, I would say even bordering camp, although I feel like you have to be somewhat unaware to be camp, and this film is very self-aware. But what we do have to do is suspend our disbelief throughout this film. I mean, with the substance itself, Sue having no paper trail, and of course the biggest, most nonsensical part of the whole film, when Sue finds 5 square meters of unused room in her apartment building and decides to add it to her place. But joking aside, the film is set in Hollywood, and it's a perfect example of replacing the old with the new and shiny. And we see that bookended with the Hollywood Star of Fame, which is at the start of the film and the end. But fun fact, this film, the whole film, was filmed in France. And it wasn't actually at the heart of the filmmaker's intent. The film was meant to mirror the universal experience of aging out and building yourself to meet expectations that are projected onto you by a society that thrives off superficiality. But what better industry than Hollywood as an example of this? And more specifically, what better example than an aerobic show? A show that focuses on sculpting an already conventionally perfect body with overwhelming repetitive close-ups, which is delivered straight into the homes of normal Americans everywhere. Literally, we are projecting into our own homes this standard. The film feels like a caricature of Hollywood and an over-exaggerated example, but the paradox is that this is not too far from the truth, and that is the director's MO. But before we think of this film as too surface level, hold on, what is in a name? The substance. Let's talk about this, because I've seen some comments and reviews from people who found the film to be too pointed and feeding too much into the male gaze, maybe going against its own point, which is very valid. This film is guaranteed to invoke some strong emotions in people. It's meant to be relatable, sadly. But this is where I see body horror truly flourish, because it talks about how we see ourselves and the human body in ways that can be overwhelming and disturbing. But personally, I love overwhelming and disturbing. But is that the purpose behind this film? Because we're so distracted by these overwhelming shots of Sue's body, it's almost like we have caused the substance effect on ourselves. Because the substance means two things in this film. It means the liquid vial product itself, a particular kind of matter with uniform properties, especially an illegal one. It also means the quality of being perfect, valid, and significant. We are so alarmed by the shiny surface of Sue that we are distracted with this projection. The film is mirroring our own insecurities about society and bringing those feelings to the surface, which is its intent. If this film pisses you off because of the male gaze, that's the point. And this was also done in a past film of hers, Revenge. We are so distracted by the superficial substance that we forget about the real substance of the film. The importance at the heart of the film is Elizabeth Sparkle and her lack of confidence and her own self-destruction, which is a form of self-harm. The director said this can all lead to the creation of your own jail of self-hatred, feeling that you're never good enough because you don't look like this or look like that. You're not going to be worth being seen or being loved or just to exist. It's like there's this outside, the surface that you see, and the movie is about what's underneath the surface and what we experience behind closed doors. Most films deal with the in-between, the transition between private and public, where this film only deals with those two polar opposite sides of a human experience being completely exposed in public, on television, people only seeing you for your surface layer, and the complete personal journey of self-destruction that a lot of people have with themselves. Let's talk about Harvey, because Dennis Quaid's character in this film is really interesting. And yes, his name is Harvey, and the director has confirmed that that is pointed for a reason. Allegedly a nod to Harvey Weinstein, the notorious horrific producer in Hollywood who went to prison for 16 years for his crimes. In this film, Harvey is by far the most shallow character, both in depth and in backstory. But we don't need much more information to understand his stereotype. There's these insane undershots and close-up angles where they reveal every pore on his face as he gobbles his food, smokes, and close talks. They even exaggerate the texture in his mouth, showing yellow and black grit between his teeth. It is disgusting, but it is effective. And if you didn't have a visceral reaction to him, I envy you, because you've never met a man like this, and I have. And I could smell the smoke coming through the screen. They did him dirty, but in the best way. I find the early scene of him meeting Elizabeth for lunch one of the most alarming scenes in the film. He explains to her that she has turned 50, and at 50, it just stops. She asks what? He can't explain, and he ends up leaving because there is no answer to that question. What stops at 50? A woman's value in Hollywood. Say what you want about Dennis Quaid, but he nailed this, and his gaggle of shareholder geese that follow him down, flock behind him down the hall to speak to Sue before her performance. It is horrifically accurate in every single way, and I really liked his character because although it's an exaggerated stereotype, it's all we needed, and I love that there was no depth given to him because there is no depth to be seen. If the body horror wasn't enough, his character sent me over the edge. But I'm sure the most interesting character in this film is the finale monster. The most significant challenge for both Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley in the film was the prosthetics. They were crafted by a French makeup artist called Pierre-Olivier Persson. He and the director named a couple of influences for the film, one being The Fly, one being The Elephant Man, which I am a huge John Merrick fan, and I feel like one in two ways about this. And then of course The Blob. These are all inspirations for the final form, the monster. They aimed for a transformation that would completely distort the characters. Elizabeth's final evolution, when you think about it that way, it's kind of like Pokemon. Her final evolution is a combination of herself and Sue. And they really wanted it to feel like a genuine metamorphosis. While Demi's final form in terms of what she acted in was what the director lovingly called the golem. She found it really hard to contort herself into the shape and the skin, the prosthetics behind it. Qualley actually became the monstro, the monster, and she has admitted in a couple of interviews that she hasn't fully recovered just yet. The final form reflects the idea of one losing themselves completely, harming themselves and turning themselves into something that is unrecognizable. To me, it reminded me of films like Basket Case, Society, and The Toxic Avenger, especially with the organs exposed, the multiple faces, including Elizabeth, Sparkle. Of course, audiences everywhere have been calling it deeply Cronenberg, with perhaps some Lynchian undertones. But a direct reference is in one of the climactic scenes where Monstro, dressed in a blue gown, applies makeup for the New Year's Eve show, and this part has the music of Bernard Herrmann's Scène de Mort from Vertigo, invoking the moment in which Judy completes her transformation in Scotty's eyes. The grand entrance to the stage is also accompanied by the Assostraf Zaujustra. I'm so bad at pronouncing that. I actually think that this is meant to mirror, we're getting into theories here, Fred's earlier text to Elizabeth saying that, "Where are you? Oh, I know you like to come in late and make an entrance as a star." But what I love about knowing that this was all prosthetics and poor Margaret Qualley was under there is that they could have easily used body doubles or extras for these parts. But the director said we needed this because it's what gives the character its unique authenticity. That's the power of makeup effects. It's the actors that breathe life into them. The challenge of those long hours in makeup were tough, but by the end of it, it brought the characters to life in a way that doesn't cheat. We've kind of tiptoed around it, but let's get into the nitty-gritty. I'm going to talk about some intense themes in this. Feel free to skip this section if you need to, but I really feel like we should say the obvious and kind of pick it apart. Let's talk about supply and the addiction. There couldn't be a more relevant time to talk about a substance in Hollywood that is injectable. I'm talking about Ozempic, but of course Ozempic does have a medical use. The idea of the anonymity behind the substance is what sets it apart. This is a fictional, unregulated drug from the black market. Keeping it anonymous is a comment on the addiction we have with beauty as a society. We focus on a fix no matter where it comes and no matter the cost. Elizabeth got into a car wreck on her birthday and she walked away without a scratch. A lot of people would see this as a new lease on life, almost a near-death experience, a moment of being grateful that we're even alive. But no, she is still mourning her youth. She's chasing the "you will be amazing" days after receiving the flowers saying you were amazing. And we see this in full force during her scene where Elizabeth is attempting to kill Sue, because the substance has taken away everything from her health, her time, years off her life, but she still succumbs to the idea that Sue is the only thing that allows her to be anything of worth in this life. It's the self-harm element of paying whatever the cost is, regardless on how it affects our bodies later in life. She says in this scene, "I need you because I hate myself and you're the only lovable part of me," which is heartbreaking. Elizabeth is addicted to the substance because of Sue, but Sue is also addicted to the substance, pleading with herself continuously, one more day, one more day. She is chasing the feeling of stabilizing herself. This plays into mental health. Mental health issues involving around eating also play a huge role in this film. Elizabeth is binging as a form of control within her time in her own body. And usually we are warned of the harmful effects on our body, but this film can cleverly show that within the same timeline, how both versions of ourselves can harm one another. It seems obvious, but it needs to be said. Elizabeth truly regrets not appreciating herself for what she was like when we first met her in the film. By chasing this addiction, she has stolen time from herself. I feel like this hits so hard on the reflection of her meeting Fred, or re-meeting Fred for the first time, and he says to her that she is still the most beautiful girl in the world. And from this we can see how much her mental health has deteriorated during the film, because she ends up being her own worst nightmare, comparing herself to herself. When she finally goes to meet Fred, she can't leave because the image of the billboard of Sue staring into her house is too much to bear. In multiple layers, she gets in her own way. Not only does she stop herself from leaving the house, the reason she stops herself is comparing herself to herself. It's these impossible standards that we set for ourselves which allow us to live in these traps. It's also one of the things I love the most about the film is the whole point of her comparing herself to herself, and it's not to anyone else. Okay, we've talked about all the deep stuff in the film. Let's talk about some theories. And what better place to start than eggs? The film shows the example of the substance being injected into an egg to show another egg growing. Of course, this is a straightforward example of showing us how the drug works, but it also works on a way of discussing the chicken or the egg dilemma. In this case, we know who came first, we know who the Matrix is, but it's a thought-provoking concept of who's really in control. And in some cultures, eggs represent new life and rebirth. It's part of the reason why we have Easter eggs. In other cultures, it can be a symbol of fertility and the circle of life. And since we're on yellow, let's talk about the symbolism or the use of yellow throughout the film and the symbol of the substance. Yellow is the color of the yolk at the start of the film, but it's also the color of Elizabeth's iconic pea coat jacket. It's her returning identifier, and we'll get back to this, but it's also the color of the substance logo, which looks like two Ds. But what I really love about this is if you flip it, it's a whole circle, like the Play-Doh ball we see in the video they show. But in the logo, it's not only split, it's put side by side. So it's showing one has to come before the other and they can't live in unison together at the same time. It's showing the 7-day period between when one of them is activated. They're both of the same, but they can't coexist at the same time. Back to the jacket, Sue only wears Elizabeth's jacket once, and it's because it's her first time in the real world. But when she sees that pink leotard, that becomes her identifier, showing that she has quickly developed her own identity away from Sue. Let's talk about green and the cost. This substance is a green color, and this is pretty obvious. It's to show that it is toxic, it's alarming, and it's something that you probably don't want to put in your body. It looks radioactive, but it's also to show that we will still put it in our body regardless of the cost. And there are so many elements in this film that show that we are hungry as a species to find the fix regardless of the cost. This is one, putting a foreign green element into our body. Another one is the way that they discard their bodies. When they're not active and not in use, instead of Sue or Elizabeth laying each other down on a blanket, I mean, I was thinking a chair, but a blanket, anything. They discard their bodies on cold and hard floors. In fact, they end up hiding their body behind a wall, discarding it, disgusted by it when they're not using it. It's really sad how much this film is about bodies, but then when we're not using that body and it is not benefiting us, we have to hide that part of ourselves. Although the cost of the substance is never discussed in this film, another point I think is really well made, because although it is kind of priceless, we find out what the true cost is. And is it really worth our lives? We discussed earlier the name The Substance, but I want to talk about Sue. Where did that come from? I have my own theory. I think Sue as an anagram is use and using and abusing your own body. But also Sue is the short version of Susan or Susanna, both of Hebrew origin, meaning lily or graceful lily. And in biblical times, the lily symbolized purity and innocence. It was the name given to girls to reflect those qualities. And Harvey in this film keeps talking about how she's pure of heart. And Sue, when she's being interviewed for the late night show, says that her biggest beauty secret is her heart and always following her heart. I love when Demi Moore's character mocks her about this. That is the best part. But I think it's a hint towards her youth and being pure. I also have another theory about the earrings, because in this film, Sue has two iconic earrings that she tends to rewear, or we see her in a lot of the promotional images. One is a smaller diamond encrusted star, and the other one are big hoop hearts. And I couldn't help but notice that in Revenge, it is an iconic part of the main character's costume that she is wearing these earrings. So I don't know if it's a calling card or if it's just something the director likes the look of, but I feel like you can expect some more protagonists in future films by this director to have these star or heart symbols, or maybe another symbol of its own. Another small detail that really packs a punch is the cookbook that Elizabeth is gifted by Harvey, and I cannot believe that it is wrapped in Christmas paper. We know that this was at least 4 months or more before Christmas, because it was before the New Year's Eve party. So we have to imagine, with the dates that we can work out, that this is old Christmas wrapping paper. It's not just what was laying around the house for that time period. And I feel like it gives it an extra touch of being completely unthoughtful and just spare whatever was laying around the house. And I also think that the cookbook itself could be his wife's. He says that his wife loves this cookbook. So I wonder if the assistant has just thrown it together as a quick present to kind of push her out the door. Either way, it's very cold. And also you have to wonder what the cookbook means itself. Being a French cookbook is interesting because the director is French, so I do think it's a nod towards that. But Elizabeth ends up using the cookbook out of spite, and one of the main iconic symbolic dishes is the turkey. To connect this later, there is a scene where Sue is taping her show and all of a sudden something bulges out of her behind and she runs off while everyone is scrutinizing her image in detail. They say, let's go frame by frame to see what is wrong with her body. And she pulls out this drumstick. It's interesting because it shows her nightmare of being imperfect, but it also shows people scrutinizing her body in detail. But was the cookbook also a message to Elizabeth that now she's retired, she can eat whatever she wants? Or even further than that, which is my favorite theory, is it's also a hint towards some of the negative language that is used to describe women's bodies as they age, getting turkey necks and crow's feet. Either way, the textures are transformed and we see a lot of them throughout the film, and the cookbook was such a great detail and entry into that. Another amazing visual moment in the film is the billboard, which is responsible for a lot that happens, and the portrait, the large photo of Elizabeth that we see in her apartment that she throws the snow globe at. Both of these pictures of these women, who are the same woman technically, are facing each other during the entire film. One staring in and one staring out. It's Elizabeth looking out at how she wants the world to see her, and her more perfect self looking in on her, even behind closed doors. It's what we talked about earlier with a show like this, showing so much skin, so much body, so much overwhelming, repetitive shots projected into your lounge room. How can you get away from a projection like that? And remember, this billboard is how the substance got started, because it is Elizabeth getting her face pulled off the billboard, which causes her to be distracted and crash, go to the hospital where she gets the thumb drive for the substance. These visual representations of both women show them their worth throughout the film, and they're a huge aspect. They're also lining the walls of the studio office. Elizabeth had her whole history literally torn down, taken across, and wiped clean. And Sue literally replaces her. This is why the film doesn't need much dialogue. It does so well at showing visual representations of everything that is happening on a deeper level and just a literal level. You can also see in the background that when Sue comes into existence, she packs up some of Elizabeth's stuff and calls it old junk Elizabeth. Just not Elizabeth's old stuff, old junk Elizabeth. But perhaps one of the best details in this film, one of the best little eggs, little moments, little reveals, it's done so well and is so inconspicuous, especially with the heightened elements of the film and when it's revealed, that you could have missed it. This is the palm tree. We see these palm trees throughout the whole film, showing us the transition in time. Day to night, we see them, showing us the 7-day period between them both using the body. And it is a good representation, obviously, for LA, the palm trees. What better to represent? Blue sky, palm trees, and they're always there. But at the end of the film, we see the blob return to the star. And what do we see from Demi Moore's face from Elizabeth's perspective? Her POV staring up at the sky is the palm trees. So the whole film we've been seeing the perspective of the star, and I feel like it gets lost in all of the chaos. This film echoes the sentiment that you can't escape yourself, and at the end, the final form stands there on the stage pleading at the crowd, "It's still me," as they freak out and try to kill the monster. Although this audience made the monster, and Harvey even says that he shaped her. This film shows the lack of responsibility that both Elizabeth and Sue have in taking care of themselves, even though that's their sign-off when they do their show. And as it crawls to its star at the end of the film, it becomes a product of what it desired to be, and there is no winning. And do you want to waste your own time or steal time from yourself by obsessing over perfection or over this projection that you have created of yourself and what your perfect self should be? This film has so many layers, and I can't wait to hear your theories. Leave them down below. I also finally checked out Cuckoo that headed to VOD this week if you want to check that video out. And this is also another video I think that you might personally like. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'm gonna go, my voice is dead. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below and I'll talk to you all very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye, friends.